You know, when you walk into an anatomy lab for the very first time, there is just this overwhelming expectation of precision.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly clinical.
Right. You have this skeletal model lying on the steel table in front of you. And the instructor points to a bone and says, well, that is the clavicle, that is the femur.
And you write it down. You memorize it.
Yeah, you memorize it because it's entirely binary. You're learning a fixed taxonomy.
It's either bone or cartilage, muscle or tendon. There's no in between.
And honestly, I mean, that level of categorization is comforting, especially when you're a student.
It gives you a sense of control, right?
Exactly. You can memorize every single component on that table, pass the practical exam with flying colors, and walk out feeling like you have completely mastered the human body.
Right. But then reality hits.
Yeah. Then you leave the lab and you go to a theater to watch a professional ballet dancer leap across a stage, and suddenly that static clinical knowledge feels entirely insufficient.
Because knowing the Latin name for the femur does absolutely nothing to explain the dance.
Right. It doesn't explain the dynamic, beautiful, fluid reality of what you're witnessing. I mean, you are looking at a living landscape.
Because a living human is a dynamic system. You know, the bones don't matter in isolation.
No, they don't.
What matters is how they operate together in time and space, how they're acted upon by gravity, by muscle tension, to create a single unified movement.
Which means the nomenclature of the anatomy lab just cannot describe the meaning of the dance.
No, it's the wrong tool for that job.
Which brings us to the visceral struggle that almost every seminary student, pastor, or biblical scholar faces on a Tuesday morning. We are shifting gears from human anatomy to the anatomy of the biblical text.
The dreaded Tuesday morning sermon prep.
Yes, you are sitting in your study staring at the Greek New Testament. You're looking at a verb in Koine Greek.
And for those listening, we do use the standard academic Erasmian pronunciation on this deep dive. So it is koinai, not koine.
Right, glad you threw that in there. So anyway, you are staring at this Koine Greek verb, and you have parsed it perfectly.
You've named the femur.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know it's an aorist, active, indicative, third-person, singular verb. You have all the data.
You've identified the specimen under the microscope, you know, the tense, the voice, the mood.
But you still have absolutely no idea how to preach the flow of the entire paragraph.
That is the wall everyone hits.
It really is. I mean, parsing gives you the trees, but you are completely missing the forest. You know the grammatical bones, but you cannot see the text dancing.
And the frustration of that is immense.
It's awful. You feel like you have all the raw data, but none of the actual meaning. And what happens, you end up preaching a sermon that basically sounds like a grammar lecture.
Which puts everyone in the pews right to sleep.
Every single time.
Yeah. And that is a remarkably common pastoral crisis. Because traditional grammar, you know, teaches us to dissect the text.
To chop it up.
Right, to chop it up into smaller and smaller pieces until we are left with isolated morphemes. But it rarely teaches us how to put the text back together again to see how it functions as a communicative act.
So our mission for this deep dive is to bridge that exact gap.
I love this topic so much.
Me too. We are going to look at the abstract, highly acclaimed linguistic architecture of Michael Halliday and Christian Matheson's Systemic Functional Linguistics.
Better known as SFL for short.
Right. And we are zooming in specifically on Chapter 5 of their work, which is titled Clause as Representation.
A fantastic chapter.
It is. And then we are going to take that theoretical framework and map it directly onto the discourse analysis of the Greek New Testament.
Which is where the lights really turn on for exegesis.
Exactly. I mean, if traditional word-level parsing is like trying to appreciate a Beethoven symphony by only identifying individual instruments.
Like pointing at the stage and saying, ah, yes, an oboe.
Yes. If parsing is just naming the oboe, then SFL is the sheet music. It actually shows you how the instruments work together to create a soaring movement.
That's a great way to frame it. Because to understand how the biblical authors constructed their theology, we have to first understand how human beings encode their experience of reality into grammar.
Right. Language isn't just data transfer.
No, it's a modeling system. Language is not just a neutral delivery system for facts. It actively models our world. And that is exactly what Halliday and Matheson's work is designed to reveal.
Let's start with the theory then, because when I read through Chapter 5, I kept coming across this specific phrase, the experiential metafunction.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
The core concept.
But, I mean, for someone whose entire understanding of grammar is based on middle school sentence diagramming.
Drawing the line to separate the subject from the predicate.
Yeah, exactly that. For that person, a term like experiential metafunction sounds incredibly dense. Like, what are Halliday and Matthiasson actually arguing here?
Well, they're arguing that whenever we use language, we are simultaneously doing several different things. And they call these things metafunctions.
Okay, multitasking with words.
Right. And the experiential metafunction specifically deals with how we use language to model our experience of the world.
Model our experience.
Yeah. Think about reality for a second. Our experience of life is just a continuous, uninterrupted flow of goings-on.
Things happen.
Exactly. Things happen. People move. Thoughts occur. The weather changes. It is a chaotic quantum of change.
It's just a constant stream of raw data hitting our senses all the time.
Yes. And if we tried to communicate that raw stream exactly as we experience it, it would be overwhelming. So the grammar of the clause exists to chunk that continuous flow into manageable pieces.
So it organizes the chaos?
It takes a quantum of change and models it into what SFL calls a figure.
A figure, so like a discrete event, a snapshot of reality.
A snapshot is a perfect way to think about it. And according to this framework, every figure has a tripartite structure. It consists of three core components.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is the process. This is the event itself. It's the action or the event or the state of being that is unfolding through time.
Okay.
In traditional grammatical terms, this is typically realized by the verbal group.
Okay, the verb is the process. That makes sense. What's
Yeah.
the second component?
The second component consists of the participants.
The people or things involved.
Exactly. These are the entities directly involved in the process. They might be the ones bringing the process about, or they might be the ones being affected by it.
Like the subject and object.
Right. These are realized by nominal groups, nouns, pronouns, noun phrases. And then the third component is the circumstances.
So the attendant details surrounding the event.
Correct. The spatial, temporal, causal, or manner contexts. Where did the process happen? When did it happen? How did it happen?
And these would be the prepositional phrases.
Yes. Prepositional phrases or adverbial groups.
So just to ground this, if I say a sentence like, Peter struck the servant with a sword in the garden,
Good biblical example.
the process is struck, the participants are Peter and the servant, and the circumstances are with a sword and in the garden.
You've got it perfectly. Now, I want you to compare that to traditional parsing. Traditional parsing just asks, what is the subject, what is the verb, and what is the object? But SFL is asking something much more three-dimensional.
Right, it asks who is involved, what is unfolding, and under what conditions.
Exactly. It's focused on the experience being represented.
I see the difference in nuance there, but I do have a philosophical question here about all this.
Go for it.
If we are saying that human language chunks reality into these specific categories, process, participant, circumstance, does this mean language forces our messy, infinite human experiences into rigid boxes?
That is a very perceptive question.
Because human experience is so chaotic, it doesn't always neatly divide into an actor, an action, and a setting, right? So are we forcing an Aristotelian grid over the chaos of life?
That is a profound question, and Halliday actually addresses this head-on. Because SFL does not view these categories as rigid, hermetically sealed boxes.
It doesn't.
No. They introduce this brilliant concept of semiotic space, or topology.
Semiotic space.
Yeah.
So treating meaning like a physical landscape.
Yes. Think of a color chart. A continuous color wheel.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
On a color wheel, you have primary colors, right?
Yeah.
Red, blue, yellow. These are your clear, prototypical categories.
Right.
When you point to pure red, there is no ambiguity. You know it's red.
Yeah.
But as you move around the wheel, red slowly blends into blue to create purple.
Right, and there's that whole gradient in between.
Exactly. There are points on the wheel where it is very difficult to say, well, is this red or is this blue? The boundaries are fuzzy.
Because they bleed into each other.
Right. And language works the exact same way. The grammar of experience is a continuous loop. The categories shade into one another.
So it's not boxes, it's a spectrum.
There is systemic indeterminacy in the grammar, which perfectly matches the indeterminacy of actual human experience.
Wow. Okay, so if human experience is a color chart, and the biblical authors are painting their theological portraits using this grammar, what are the primary colors they're working with?
So the SFL framework identifies three major primary process types that anchor this semiotic space. The first is material processes.
Material, so physical stuff.
Yes. This is the outer physical world. It is the realm of doing and happening. building, breaking, running, falling, hitting.
Outer physical reality. Got it.
And in this process, the entity doing the action is called the actor, and the entity being acted upon is the goal.
Actor and goal. Okay, what's the second primary color?
The second primary type is mental processes.
So the opposite of physical.
Right. This represents the inner world of consciousness. It covers sensing, thinking, feeling, and perceiving, loving, knowing, seeing, fearing, believing.
Things happening inside the head.
Exactly. And here, the entity experiencing the consciousness is called the sensor, and the thing being felt or thought is the phenomena.
So material is physical doing, mental is internal sensing.
And the third primary color is relational processes.
Relational.
Yes. This is the abstract world of relations. It is the realm of being. It's about being, having, identifying, and classifying.
Setting up equations.
Exactly. Setting up equations like X is Y or X has Y.
Okay, those are the primary colors. Material, mental, relational, doing, sensing, being. But you mentioned the color wheel has blems, the purples and greens.
The intermediate types.
Yeah, where do those fit in?
Well, sitting between these three primary poles, there are three intermediate boundary types. Let's start between the physical material world and the internal mental world. Right there you have behavioral processes.
Behavioral.
These are the outer physical manifestations of inner workings.
Okay, let me make sure I understand this one. So an action like weeping, it is a physical material action, right?
Yeah.
And tears are actually falling from your eyes.
Physical reality, yes.
But it isn't driven by a physical cause. It's driven entirely by an internal mental state of sadness or joy.
That is a textbook example. Weeping, breathing, coughing, smiling, dreaming. These are all behavioral processes. They sit right on the border of physical doing and mental sensing.
That makes perfect sense.
Then, sitting between the mental world of consciousness and the relational world of abstract being, you have verbal processes.
Verbal processes,
Like-
like saying, speaking, commanding.
Yes, exactly.
But wait, why is that a boundary between mental and relational? I mean, I would have thought speaking is a physical material act. You are using your vocal cords to push physical air out of your lungs.
That's a fair point. It does have a physical component. But functionally, within the grammar, a verbal process is the symbolic enactment of consciousness.
Symbolic enactment.
Think about it. You are taking an inner mental thought, a mental process,
Yeah.
and you're giving it an abstract relational existence in the real world through speech.
Oh, I see.
You are projecting your consciousness outward, saying, telling, promising, commanding. These all create relational realities based on mental states.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The spoken word bridges the mind and the relational reality.
Okay. Finally, sitting between the relational world of being and the material world of doing, you have existential processes. This is simple, bare existence, like saying, there's a storm, or there was a man sent from God. It posits the existence of a physical entity without actually assigning it an action.
I really want to translate this for the pastors and teachers listening because this color wheel concept is helpful, but we deal in texts and narratives every week.
Right. How do we visualize this in a text?
Think of these process types as the different camera lenses a film director uses to shoot a movie.
Oh, I like this.
So a material process is your wide action shot. The camera is pulled back, capturing the car chase, the armies clashing, the physical movement of characters through space. It's totally kinetic.
It is entirely focused on physical impact and transformation.
Right. Then the director switches lenses. The mental process is your extreme, tight close-up on a character's face.
The physical action fades away.
Exactly. The car chase outside suddenly stops mattering. The camera is right in their eyes. We're suddenly inside their heads, seeing the fear take hold, tracking their internal emotional and cognitive state. The focus of the narrative completely shifts inward.
And the verbal process.
The verbal process is the dialogue shot, the over-the-shoulder camera capturing the social dynamic, the argument, the exchange of information and power between two characters.
That is brilliant.
The director uses these linguistic lenses to guide the audience's attention, right?
That analogy holds up incredibly well because a biblical author is doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
They are using these linguistic lenses to shape the reader's theological response.
Think about how radically your reading of a text changes when you realize the biblical author is rapidly switching these lenses.
It changes everything.
They pull you from a wide-action physical shot, a material process, and slam you into a tight emotional close-up, a mental process, and then drop you into a dialogue, a verbal process.
The pacing, the tension, the entire focus of the narrative is dictated by these grammatical shifts.
Yes. And if you are only parsing verbs, if you are only looking at aorist, active, indicative, you just see a string of past tense actions.
They all look the same.
You completely miss the cinematic shifts in perspective.
You miss the architecture of the story.
Okay, I am totally sold on the theory. But how do these universal linguistic camera angles actually map onto the nuts and bolts of the Greek New Testament?
Right, we have to cross the bridge.
Yeah, how do we bridge Halliday's linguistics with our standard Greek exegesis?
We do that by looking at morphosyntax.
Oh, okay.
Because Koine Greek is a highly inflected language, and it is a prodrop language.
Let's unpack that for a second.
So that means the grammatical function of a word in a sentence is determined by its ending, its morphological case, not by its word order.
Right, which is totally different from English.
Exactly. In English, word order is everything. Dog bites man is very different from man bites dog.
Very different day for the man.
But in Greek, you can put the words in whatever order you want. The case ending on the noun tells you who is doing the biting.
Because it's inflected.
Right. And furthermore, being prodrop means the subject is often embedded entirely in the verb ending. The author doesn't even need to write the explicit pronoun he or she or it.
Which gives Greek authors incredible rhetorical flexibility. I mean, they can front-load a sentence with a specific word just for emphasis, regardless of its grammatical function in the sentence.
Exactly. And what SFL discourse analysis reveals is that Greek systematically maps Halliday's transitivity functions onto its case and voice systems.
Oh, wow. Okay, show me how that works.
Let's look at the cases first. The nominative case maps directly to the primary participant in any process.
The main actor.
Right. It is the actor in a material process.
Yeah.
It's the censor in a mental process. It's the carrier in a relational process.
Okay.
Then the accusative case maps to the impacted entity. So the goal in a material process or the phenomenon in a mental process.
Got it. And the dative?
The dative case typically maps to the benefactive, like the recipient or client of an action, or to various circumstances like the instrument used or the location.
Okay, I'm following you on the cases. Nominative is the actor, accusative is the goal. But wait, let me pause you right there.
Sure.
Because I can literally hear the second-year Greek students groaning right
Yeah.
now. Uh-oh. If nominative just equals actor and accusative equals goal, how is this any different than what I learned in my first semester of Greek?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, are you just giving me new fancy linguistic vocabulary for subject and direct object? Why do I need a whole new framework for this?
It is a vital distinction, and it comes down to the difference between static grammar and dynamic discourse.
Okay, unpack that.
Traditional parsing labeling things, subject and direct object, is inherently static. It treats a single sentence as a closed, isolated universe.
Right, you diagram the sentence and you're done.
Exactly. You parse the sentence, you put a period at the end, and you move on to the next one. It stops at the boundary of the clause.
But SFL doesn't.
Systemic functional linguistics is dynamic discourse analysis. It does not stop at the period.
It tracks the grammar across the whole paragraph.
Across the paragraph, the chapter, the entire book. If you look at a narrative text and you trace how a specific character shifts from being the actor in a series of material processes to suddenly becoming the censor in a mental process, you are tracking the narrative arc.
Oh, that's fascinating.
You are seeing shifts in textual power dynamics.
Give me an example of that.
Imagine a character who starts out physically dominating a scene. They are the nominative actor of several violent material processes, hitting, breaking, running.
Okay.
But then they encounter Jesus. And suddenly, grammatically, they become the accusative receiver of a verbal command. Or they become the censor of mental terror.
Their grammar changes.
Yes. Traditional sentence-level parsing conceals this structural rhythm completely because it resets at every period. SFL exposes the rhythm. It shows you how the text means what it means over time.
That makes so much sense. We aren't just looking at isolated sentences. We are tracking the flow of agency and power through the linguistic choices.
It breathes life into the text.
To prove the power of this, let's actually step into the pulpit. Let's apply this SFL topology to a familiar text and see how tracking these process types literally preaches the sermon for you.
Let's do it.
Let's look at Mark 4.35 through 41, the narrative of Jesus calming the storm.
Oh, this is a phenomenal case study for SFL.
It really is.
If we apply this linguistic framework to Mark 4, we see that Mark did not just throw verbs onto a page haphazardly. He intentionally structured the narrative in 4 distinct phases.
4 phases.
And each phase is marked by a dramatic shift in process types. Let's look at phase 1. It covers verse 35 to the first half of verse 38. This section is overwhelmingly oriented around material and existential processes.
The wide action physical chaos.
Yes. Let's look at the Greek text, verse 35. Jesus says, "Let us go across to the other side." That is a material process of motion.
Physical movement.
Verse 37, and a great windstorm arose. That is an existential process shading into a material one. Then it says the waves were breaking into the boat.
Very violent.
That is a highly active, transformative material process. The physical world is violently acting upon the disciples. The entire focus is on kinetic outer reality.
It's pure chaos.
But where is Jesus? The text says he is in the stern, sleeping on the cushion. Sleeping is a behavioral process.
Man, this is where the camera lens analogy really shines.
Doesn't it?
The wide action shot is showing a massive hurricane, waves crashing, a boat sinking. It's violent material chaos. But then Mark cuts to a tight shot on Jesus, and it's absolute stillness, a quiet behavioral process.
The contrast is jarring.
The grammatical contrast alone is already preaching. The disciples are being battered by material processes. So what happens in phase 2?
Phase 2 begins in the middle of verse 38. The disciples wake Jesus up, and the nature of the crisis radically shifts. Look at their speech act. They don't say, "Teacher, grab a bucket and start bailing water."
All right, which would be a material request.
Exactly. Instead, they say, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?"
Do you not care?
In Greek, the phrase is ou mele isoi. This is a mental process of emotion. Look at what the disciples have just done grammatically.
They changed the lens?
Yes. They are taking a material, physical crisis, the fact that they are physically perishing, which is a material transformative process, and they are reinterpreting it through a mental lens.
Wow.
They're questioning the internal emotional state of Jesus' consciousness. The real crisis for the disciples has moved from the outer physical threat of the waves to the inner consciousness of perceived abandonment.
That is unbelievable. They're essentially saying that the material reality, the storm, is killing us. But the deeper crisis is your mental reality, your lack of care for us.
Exactly.
They have shifted the battleground entirely from the sea to the mind.
Which sets up phase 3 perfectly in verse 39. Jesus wakes up. How does he respond to the material chaos of the storm and the mental crisis of his disciples?
Does he grab an oar?
No, he doesn't touch anything. He uses a verbal process. The Greek says, "Epitime sin to nemo," he rebuked the wind.
He speaks to it.
He acts upon a non-conscious natural phenomenon using a speech act. He issues a command, "Peace, be still." In Greek, siopa, bafimoso. Literally, be silent, be muzzled.
He personifies the wind and the sea. He doesn't treat them as material obstacles to be physically overcome. He treats them as conscious receivers of a verbal command.
And what is the result of that verbal process?
Not a material outcome.
Exactly. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. The violent physical world completely submits to the symbolic enactment of his consciousness.
So we have moved from material chaos to mental panic to verbal authority, resulting in material peace. The pacing of that is just incredible.
Mark is a master of syntax.
So what is the final phase?
Phase 4, verses 40 and 41, is the climax of the narrative. The wind is dead calm. The material threat is entirely gone. But how did the disciples react?
They're terrified.
Right. Verse 41 says, "And they were filled with great fear." In Greek, it's a cognate accusative, ephobethe-san, ephobon, emiajon. They feared a great fear.
So an intense mental process.
An intense mental process of emotion. Their outer material threat has completely vanished, but their inner mental terror has actually amplified.
Because the divine authority they just witnessed inside the boat is far more terrifying than the storm outside the boat.
And this mental terror drives them to the ultimate theological question of the passage. They say to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?"
Who then is this?
In SFL terms, "who then is this?" is a relational identifying query. They are desperately trying to assign an exclusive identity to the person standing in front of them.
This is what I mean when I say the grammar is the sermon outline.
It really is.
Think about a typical mediocre sermon on Mark 4. A pastor will spend 20 minutes describing the physical storm. They'll talk about how high the waves were, the geography of the Sea of Galilee, how wet the disciples were.
They treat the entire text as a material process.
Exactly. They focus entirely on the physical miracle.
Which completely misses Mark's point.
It misses the whole point. If you trace these linguistic shifts, the Greek text is handing you the blueprint. You are supposed to move your congregation through these lenses.
You take them on the journey.
You start with the physical terror, the material. You move to the profound doubt regarding God's care, the mental. You encounter his absolute intervening word, the verbal. and you finally arrive at theological awe regarding his true identity, the relational.
It's a perfect progression.
Mark linguistically engineered a trajectory
Okay.
from outer experience to inner consciousness to divine authority, arriving at theological identity.
This approach just forces the exegete to align their homiletics with the author's linguistics. You are no longer imposing a catchy three-point alliterated outline onto the text.
Right, no more manufactured points.
You are extracting the outline directly from the syntactic choices the author made.
Okay, that works brilliantly for narrative. I can clearly see how Mark uses material and verbal processes to drive a pulse-pounding story. But what happens when we leave the Gospels and turn to the epistles?
It's a genre shift.
Yeah, Paul isn't usually trying to tell a story about a boat. He is writing dense, abstract, systematic theology to the Romans or the Ephesians. Does this whole SFL camera lens framework just fall apart when there is no physical action to track?
Not at all. The primary colors just shift.
Okay.
When you move from narrative genres to epistolary genres, you see a massive statistical drop in material and verbal processes. And you see a huge spike in mental processes of cognition and relational processes.
Because he's arguing ideas.
Exactly. When a biblical author's goal is to define doctrine, project beliefs, and construct logical, theological arguments, they have to rely on the language of thinking and being.
Let's dig into that. Let's look at mental processes and what they tell us about Christian epistemology.
Epistemology being how we know what we know.
Right, meaning how the New Testament writers structurally model the concept of knowing, believing, and having faith. Earlier, we established that a mental clause requires a sensor and a phenomenon.
Correct. A mental clause construes a process of sensing, thinking, or feeling. The sensor must be a conscious being, or an entity endowed with consciousness by the author.
Like the disciples fearing the storm.
Right. And the phenomenon is that which is sensed, thought, or felt. It's the object of the consciousness. But SFL provides a really critical nuance here regarding the types of phenomenon.
What do you mean?
Well, specifically, it distinguishes between projection, which deals with ideas, and metaphenomena, which deal with facts.
Ideas versus facts. Theologically, that sounds massive.
It is.
Walk us through the grammatical difference. What is a projection?
Let's look at projection first. In SFL, mental clauses can project an entirely separate independent clause that expresses the content of a thought or a belief.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's look at Romans 3.28. Paul writes, "For we hold that one is justified by faith apart from works of the law."
In Greek, that's logizimetha, gart, dikios, thai, piaste, and theidropon.
Yes. The main verb lobiadeitha we hold, we reckon, or we consider, is a mental process of cognition. And it projects an idea clause. The belief that a person is justified by faith is the content generated within the sensor's consciousness.
So it originates in the mind.
Right. It is a theological idea being actively projected by the mind of the believer. The idea exists because the sensor is thinking it.
Okay, so that is an idea. The believer's mind is generating the thought. What then is a fact? And how does the grammar treat it differently?
A fact, or a metaphenomena, operates on a completely different level. Let's look at the Johannine epistles, or certain passages in Romans, where the author uses phrases like, "we know that."
The famous oi dah men hoti passages.
Exactly. In SFL, that hoti clause, that clause following the verb of knowing, does not function as a projected idea. It functions as a fact.
Okay, but what makes it a fact grammatically?
A fact is an objective reality, a pre-existing proposition that impinges upon the believer's consciousness from the outside.
From the outside.
Yes. It is treated by the grammar as an embedded participant in the clause, not just a subjective projection of the mind.
I want to make sure I really grasp this because the pastoral implications seem huge. Are you saying that when Paul or John writes, "we know that X is true," the grammar models X as an external reality that is essentially acting upon the believer's mind, rather than a thought the believer is just generating themselves?
Yes, that is exactly what the grammar is doing. Let's look at 1 John 3.13. We know that we have passed out of death into life.
Okay.
The fact of passing from death to life is an objective theological reality. It exists independently of the sensor. It is a metaphenomenon. The believer's consciousness is simply receiving or acknowledging the fact.
So how does this change the way a pastor might counsel someone sitting in their office who is struggling with assurance of salvation?
It changes everything.
Because in modern evangelicalism, there is often this intense therapeutic obsession with our internal feelings. If I don't feel saved today, if I am having a moment of doubt, I feel like my faith is failing.
And if biblical knowing was only ever modeled as projecting an idea, then that anxiety would be justified.
Right, because if faith is just an idea you project, then the moment you stop thinking the idea, the reality vanishes.
Exactly. The burden of maintaining the truth rests entirely on your subjective cognitive state.
Which is an exhausting way to live as a Christian.
It's possible. But by heavily utilizing facts clauses, metaphenomena, the New Testament writers structurally model Christian epistemology as the reception of objective reality.
Wow.
Christ died for sinners. That is a fact. He rose from the dead. That is a fact. These facts exist whether your subjective consciousness is currently projecting them or not. They impinge on you.
They exist outside of you.
Right. The reality of your salvation is anchored in the objective fact, not in the strength of your subjective idea on a Tuesday afternoon.
That takes an immense amount of pressure off the believer. Biblical faith is not about manufacturing an internal feeling or sustaining this exhausting cognitive projection. It's about your consciousness being anchored to an objective, historical, and theological fact.
The grammar of the Greek New Testament structurally preaches assurance.
It anchors epistemology in reality, not just subjective ideation. That is so good.
It really is.
Well, if Paul uses mental processes to anchor Christian epistemology, John is the absolute master of using relational processes to anchor the identity of the divine.
Oh, John's relational clauses are amazing.
Which brings us to our second major pulpit payoff, resolving Christological debates.
This might be the most valuable application of Chapter 5's framework for anyone engaged in apologetics or systematic theology.
I believe it.
We established earlier that relational clauses model experience as being. They establish relationships. But SFL distinguishes between two very specific subtypes of relational clauses, attributive clauses and identifying clauses.
Attributive and identifying.
Yes, and confusing the two leads to massive theological error.
Okay, let's define these clearly before we jump into the Greek text.
Sure. An attributive clause assigns a quality, a characteristic, or a class membership to an entity, which SFL calls the carrier.
The carrier. Oh,
It answers the question, what is X like? Or, what category does X belong to? For example, the sentence, the sky is blue. Blue is the attribute being assigned to the carrier, the sky.
simple enough. What about identifying?
An identifying clause, on the other hand, equates one entity with another. It equates a token with a value to establish an exclusive identity.
An exclusive identity.
Right. It answers the question, which one is X? Or who is X?
I need an analogy for this. Okay, an attributive clause is like saying the car is black. You are assigning a quality to the car. Black is the attribute, the car is the carrier.
Right. And lots of cars can be black.
Exactly. It is a shared category. But an identifying clause is like saying this car is the Batmobile.
The Batmobile.
You are establishing an absolute exclusive identity. This car is the token. The Batmobile is the value. There was only one Batmobile. Token equals value.
The Batmobile analogy works perfectly. Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Now let's take that distinction to the most heavily debated sentence in the entire Greek New Testament.
John 1.1c.
Yes. And the Word was God. In Greek.
Yeah.
Okay, the os en, ilogos.
This is the ultimate battleground verse. I mean, you have Orthodox Trinitarians, you have Jehovah's Witnesses arguing it means a God, and you have modalists arguing that Jesus is the exact same identical person as the Father. Everyone fights over this sentence.
They do.
Typically in seminary, we are taught Colwell's rule to explain why the OS doesn't have an article, but honestly, it often feels like a cumbersome grammatical workaround.
It can feel that way.
Mm.
But SFL provides a much cleaner discourse-level explanation. Let's look at the morphosyntax.
Let's do it.
In this clause, ologos, the word, has the definite article honophelgos. It is definite. The OS God is an orthrous. It does not have a definite article.
Okay.
According to SFL principles mapping onto Greek grammar, a structure with one definite noun and one anothrous noun indicates an attributive relational clause.
Ah. So it is the equivalent of the car is black, not the car is the Batmobile.
Exactly. John is designating hologos as the carrier and the OS as the attribute. He is assigning the quality, the essential nature, the attributed deity to the word.
The quality of being God.
Right. He is saying the word fully belongs to the category of the divine. He possesses all the qualities of God.
Which utterly refutes the Arian or Jehovah's Witness idea that he is just a god or some created being. He possesses the uncreated attribute of deity.
Exactly.
But critically, because it is attributive and not identifying, John is not saying the word is the exact same identical person as the Father.
Precisely.
Yeah.
If John had wanted to say the word and the Father were exclusively identical, which is the ancient heresy of modalism, the idea that God just wears different masks, he would have written an identifying clause.
How would that look in Greek?
To do that in Greek, he would likely make both nouns definite.
Oh.
Ho the os outrino logos. The word is the God. Token equals value.
But he intentionally didn't construct it that way.
No, he didn't. The grammar perfectly protects the distinction of persons within the Trinity while simultaneously affirming the full, unmitigated deity of the Son.
I just cannot overstate how practical this is for a pastor. The grammatical distinction between the car is black and the car is the Batmobile literally saves you from accidentally preaching heresy.
It really does.
If you preach John 1.1c as an identifying clause, if you tell your congregation Jesus is the Father, you've just stepped outside of Orthodox Christianity. The SFL framework proves that John's Christology in this verse is attributive.
But we also have to recognize that John does use identifying clauses when he wants to establish exclusivity.
Where does he do that?
Look at John 14.6, where Jesus says, I am the way, and the truth, and the life. The Greek is ego, eimi, heodaske, healetheia, hezoe.
Let me look at that based on the rules we just discussed. So the subject is a hao I, that's a definite pronoun, and the complements he hodas, the way, heothea, the truth, they all have definite articles.
Right.
Both sides of the equation are definite.
And therefore, SFL categorizes this as an identifying relational clause. Aoi is the token, and heodos, the way, is the value.
Token equals value.
In this case, Jesus is not just saying, I have the quality of being a way, as if he is one path among many. He is establishing absolute exclusive identity. I am the one and only way.
He is claiming to be the Batmobile.
Yes, absolute exclusivity. By analyzing the definiteness of the nouns and applying the concepts of attributive versus identifying processes, a pastor can preach the exclusivity of Christ from John 14.6 with absolute grammatical confidence.
And defend the nuanced triune nature of God in John 1.1 with surgical precision. This is incredible.
It is a game changer for exegesis.
We've covered a lot of ground. We've looked at doing with material processes, thinking with mental processes, and being with relational processes. But I want to explore a specific tactical choice biblical authors make.
What's that?
What happens when an author intentionally wants to hide who is doing the doing?
Oh, this is fascinating. This brings us to the concept of voice and how voice is used to redistribute interpersonal responsibility within a text. In SFL, choosing an operative voice, which we normally call active, versus a receptive voice, which we call passive, isn't just a stylistic choice to avoid sounding repetitive.
It's not just elegant writing.
No, it is a strategic theological choice about thematic prominence and agency.
In the Greek New Testament, this phenomenon shows up most famously in what scholars call the passivum divinum, the divine passive.
Yes, the Greek New Testament is littered with receptive clauses, often material or mental processes, where the actor is completely ellipted.
Ellipted meaning left out.
Exactly. The agent of the action is intentionally unstated.
Let's ground this in a text. Let's look at the Beatitudes, Matthew 5.4. Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted."
Good example.
The Greek verb for they shall be comforted is paraklethesanti.
Let's break that verb down using our SFL framework. Paraklethesanti is a receptive process. Semantically, it sits right on the boundary between material and mental, dealing with restoration and emotional comfort. The goal of the process, the ones who are receiving the action of comfort, is those who mourn, the ontoi. But look at the clause. Who is the actor? Who is doing the comforting?
Well, the text doesn't explicitly say. The actor is ellipted. Jesus doesn't say, "Blessed are those who mourn, for God shall comfort them."
Precisely. Now, anyone reading this in a first-century Jewish context knows that the implicit actor is God. This is the passivum divinum.
Right.
The author uses a receptive clause, omitting the explicit mention of God, to respect the Jewish reverential avoidance of speaking the divine name directly.
But beyond just cultural reverence, what does this grammatical choice mean rhetorically for the listener? I mean, imagine you are a poor, mourning Galilean sitting on the side of that mountain listening to Jesus preach this. How does the receptive voice hit your ear?
It's profound. By leaving the actor unstated, the grammar forces the listener to look entirely beyond themselves.
Because they can't do it.
Right. If the text said, "You must find a way to comfort yourselves," that is an operative clause. You are the actor. The burden is on you. But the receptive clause strips the mourner of all agency in the process of comfort. They are strictly the goal.
Man, this completely changes the way we should preach the Beatitudes.
Doesn't it?
So often the Beatitudes are preached as a self-help checklist. Here are 8 things you need to do to be a good Christian. Go mourn. Go be meek. Go be pure.
Work harder.
Yeah. But the grammar itself, the use of the divine passive, forces the listener into a posture of pure reception. The grammar dictates that God is the hidden ultimate source of power behind the text. You cannot comfort yourself. You must be comforted by the unstated agent.
The linguistic choice of the passive voice is, in itself, a profound theological statement about grace.
It really is.
It redistributes the responsibility for salvation, for comfort, for healing, away from the human subject, and places it entirely onto the divine.
This realization that God is often the hidden agent operating behind the text leads us perfectly into Halliday's second profound model of transitivity.
Yes. And honestly, when I read chapter 5, this might have been the most paradigm-shifting part for me.
The ergative model.
Yeah, because everything we have discussed so far, actor, goal, material processes, belongs to what SFL calls the transitive model. But Halliday introduces this complementary perspective called the ergative model.
The ergative perspective is brilliant, and it is absolutely essential for unpacking biblical theology.
Break it down for us.
The transitive model asks a linear question. Does the action extend from an actor to a goal? It tracks the flow of energy from point A to point B.
Okay, linear tracking.
But the ergative model zooms out and asks a fundamental question about causation. Is the process brought about from within, or is it caused from the outside?
Okay, let's use another analogy to make this really clear. The transitive model is like standing over a pool table watching a game of billiards.
Good visual.
You see the cue ball roll across the green felt and strike the 8-ball. You are tracking the linear extension of kinetic energy. Ball A, the actor, impacts ball B, the goal. It is a linear chain of events. Exactly. It describes what happened on the table.
But the ergative model requires you to step back from the table entirely. It looks at the rolling cue ball and asks, did that cue ball start rolling all by itself, or did a human being holding a pool cue strike it?
Right.
It's not interested in the extension of energy. It's interested in the origin of causation.
Let's apply SFL terminology to your billiards analogy. In the ergative model, every single process has one central, indispensable participant called the medium.
The medium.
This is the entity without which the process simply would not exist. In your analogy, the rolling cue ball is the medium.
Okay.
If the process is self-engendered, if the ball somehow started rolling from within its own power, it consists of only a medium and a process. SFL calls this a middle clause.
The event is just happening on its own.
But if the process is brought about by an external cause, SFL introduces a new participant called the agent.
The agent.
The agent is the external force, the person holding the pool cue, that causes the medium to experience the process. SFL calls this an effective clause.
So how does this map onto biblical theology? Because this seems to strike at the very heart of doctrines regarding salvation, sanctification, and human free will.
It absolutely does.
Mm-hmm.
Let's think about the concept of spiritual awakening or regeneration. Is a spiritual awakening a happening? Meaning, is it a self-engendered event where the human being is simply the medium of a middle clause generating their own faith? Or is it a doing?
A doing.
Is it an effective clause caused by an external agent, namely the Holy Spirit acting upon the human medium?
Wow. When you put it like that, it's clear the grammar is the theology. So how does Greek morphology signal this ergative reality?
The ergative structure of Greek verbs, particularly the interplay between active, passive, and middle voices, often reveals exactly where the biblical authors place the locus of causation.
Give me an example.
When you analyze the verbs associated with salvation, you frequently find that the human believer is grammatically positioned as the medium, while God is positioned as the external agent initiated the process.
Even in places where the English translation makes it look like a standard active transitive clause.
That's the danger of English translations.
Right, because we might read in English, he believed, and we naturally read that as transitive actor, he doing an action, believed.
But in the Greek text, the morphological voice, perhaps a specific use of the passive or middle voice, might be screaming an ergative reality.
The state of belief was actualized in the medium by the external causative power of the agent.
Yes. Let's look at Philippians 2:1, 12, and 13. Paul says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling.
Which sounds totally transitive.
If you stop there, that looks like a pure material transitive command. You are the actor, salvation is the goal. Go do it.
A total works-based theology.
But look at the next verse. For it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure.
There it is.
Paul explicitly introduces the ergative agent. You are the medium working out the salvation, but God is the external agent causing the willing and the working.
So the theology of synergism versus monergism is fundamentally an argument about ergative grammar. Is the human the agent of their own salvation, or merely the medium acted upon by the divine agent?
Exactly.
This has massive immediate implications for the pulpit. As a pastor, are you preaching a text as a self-engendered transitive action, putting the heavy burden on the congregation to just do the saving action themselves?
Which leads to burnout.
Or are you preaching it as an ergative effective process, where they are the medium being acted upon by the unmerited grace of the divine agent? I mean, if you get the linguistics wrong, you get the theology wrong.
The grammar doesn't just describe the theology. The grammar is the architecture of the theology.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. Let's take a moment to summarize the immense amount of ground we've covered. Integrating systemic functional linguistics, specifically Halliday and Matheson's Chapter 5, completely shifts our paradigm regarding the Greek New Testament.
It forces us to stop treating the Greek text like a dead specimen in an anatomy lab.
Waiting to be sterilely parsed under a microscope.
We have to stop just naming the bones.
Yeah, we really do. We have to start reading it as a living, breathing, dynamic artifact of meaning.
Yes.
When you track the process types across a text, asking, is this a material action, a mental perception, a relational identity, or a verbal command? And when you carefully identify the participants, is this character an actor exerting physical force, a censor paralyzed by fear, or a token asserting exclusive divine identity?
It changes everything.
You suddenly reveal the literary architecture and the theological heartbeat of the text.
You see the narrative flow in Mark from physical chaos to mental terror to relational awe. You see the epistemological shift in the epistles from subjective internal feelings to objective external facts.
And you see the Christological precision of attributive versus identifying clauses in John. You perceive the grace embedded in the divine passive and the ergative agent.
You stop staring at the skeleton and you finally see the dance.
I love that. So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative challenge as you prepare for your study or your sermon this week. Look at the biblical text you were working on. Really look at the grammatical processes underlying the English translation.
Don't just trust the English.
Right. Are you accidentally preaching a text as a material process? Exhorting your congregation to do an action, to work harder, to strive more, to fix their own lives, when the Greek text actually wrote it as an identifying relational process?
A fixed, unchanging truth about who Christ already is or who they already are in him.
Exactly. That is arguably the most common and most dangerous homiletical trap.
It really is.
I mean, how often does misidentifying the linguistic process type accidentally turn a sermon of grace into a sermon of works?
Too often.
If the text says, you are the light of the world, that is a relational clause of being. It is an established identity. But if you preach it as, you must do these 10 things this week to shine brighter, you have converted a relational identity into a material action.
You have fundamentally changed the gospel.
Something to chew on before Sunday.
The grammar matters deeply because the gospel matters deeply.
Absolutely. Well, until next time, keep reading, keep diving deep into the text, and don't just name the bones. Look for the dance.